suara 1, 2, 3. Ya, 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 suara 1, 2, 3.
Para hadirin yang dihormati sekalian, ladies and gentlemen, selamat kembali ke dalam Dewan. Welcome back. Tanpa melengahkan masa, majlis dengan penuh takzimnya menjemput Yang Berhormat Dr. Abdul Aziz bin Bari dan Yang Berhormat Datuk Ahmad bin Kasim untuk mengambil tempat di hadapan. Majlis juga ingin menjemput Yang Berhormat Datuk Ahmad bin Kasim sebagai moderator untuk meneruskan sesi pertama yang bertajuk Pemerkasaan Parlimen Berpusatkan Rakyat. Now, I would like to invite Honorable Dr. Abdul Aziz Bari to share his knowledge in the session entitled Journey Towards People-Centered Parliament. This session will be moderated by Honorable Datuk Ahmad Kasim. So without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Honorable Datuk Ahmad Kasim to start the session.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi washabihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim wa la haula wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyil azim. Yang Berhormat Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Muhammad Yusof, Yang di-Pertua Dewan Rakyat, Bahagia Datuk Profesor Dr. Rizwan Osman, Timbalan Pengurusi Merangkap Ketua Eksekutif Institut Darul Ihsan, the Honorable guests from Australia and Canada, Yang Berhormat Dr. Abdul Aziz bin Bahari, Exco in Change of Education, Science and Environment Portfolio, Perak Darul Rizwan, Ahli yang berhormat, peserta-peserta seminar. I want to conduct the session in Bahasa Malaysia. Ahli-ahli yang berhormat, peserta-peserta yang dikasihi sekalian, betapa pentingnya reformasi di dalam sistem parlimen. Apabila saya diberi amanah sebagai speaker untuk Dewan Undangan Negeri Kedah Darul Aman dan sedikit perbincangan dengan rakan-rakan speaker daripada negeri-negeri yang lain, selepas kejayaan 9 Mei 2018 Malaysia baru, kita merasai bahawa bukan sekadar institusi di peringkat parlimen itu perlu reformasi, tetapi institusi Dewan Undangan Negeri di peringkat DUN di seluruh Malaysia juga perlu reformasi seiring dengan reformasi di peringkat parlimen. Terlalu banyak lompong-lompong ataupun ruang-ruang yang perlu dibaiki di dalam peraturan-peraturan dewan. Ada negeri yang tidak pernah dipindah peraturan dewan sejak seawal penubuhannya. Dan kalau di peringkat negeri Kedah sudah hampir 20 tahun tidak dipindah peraturan-peraturan dewan. Sedangkan masa sudah berubah, suasana sudah berubah dan sebagainya. Oleh sebab itulah maka seminar seperti ini yang dirancang oleh Institut Darul Ihsan dengan kerjasama Dewan Rakyat sangat penting kepada rakyat Malaysia dan juga kepada akademik, pada peserta untuk kita menghayati bagaimana perubahan di peringkat parlimen itu perlu diperkasakan dan diikuti oleh di peringkat DUN. Ahli yang berhormat, sebab tu saya dulu sebagai ahli Parlimen Kuala Kedah, saya selalu ada cita-cita untuk duduk di kerusi yang pertama itu. Kerana kerusi itu dulunya ahli Parlimen Kepala Batas. Selepas tu ahli Parlimen Pekan. Kalau sekarang ni tempat tu ahli Parlimen Langkawi. Tapi sekarang ni mereka bagi pengiktirafan kepada saya untuk duduk di kerusi itu. Terima kasih Hidayah. Dan kalau tuan-tuan yang berada dalam dewan ini dengan kedinginan dewan ini, dengan keempukan kerusinya, kalau tuan-tuan semua tertidur, jadi selepas ini jangan marah ahli parlimen tidur. Jadi itulah nak membuktikan. Kalaulah tuan-tuan baru 1 hari ataupun setengah hari sudah tertidur, bayangkan persidangan parlimen sampai 1 bulan sehingga 45 hari. Jadi saya tidak ingin bercoloteh panjang. Sesi kita adalah sangat penting supaya ahli akademik kita yang sekarang ni menjadi ahli yang berhormat, menjadi expert negeri, mempunyai banyak pengalaman yang boleh dikongsi semasa beliau sebagai ahli akademik melihat perspektif perundangan, perlembagaan dan sebagainya. Dan sekarang ni beliau berada di posisi sebagai pemain utama di dalam perundangan. Jadi kita lihat apakah isi-isi utama yang akan dibentangkan oleh Profesor Dr. Aziz Bahri dalam sesi yang pertama, iaitu pemberkasaan parlimen perpusatkan rakyat. Jadi saya tidak mengambil masa yang panjang. Yang berhormat Dr. Aziz Bahri, saya persilakan.
Terima kasih Datuk Pengerusi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat pagi. Excellency saya yang berhormat, tuan-tuan dan puan sekalian. Saya sangat sukacita pada pagi ini kerana dapat hadir dalam seminar reformasi parlimen di Malaysia, dan saya sangat sukacita dapat jumpa kawan-kawan lama dan juga dengan bekas pelajar-pelajar saya yang saya rasa mengembalikan nostalgia di universiti, dan kehadiran yang begitu ramai juga peserta menunjukkan bahawa rakyat begitu berminat dengan reformasi parlimen yang menjadi tema kita pada pagi ini. Saya akan bentangkan beberapa perkara yang telah pun saya catat dalam small note in English untuk faedah rakan-rakan colleagues from abroad, dan this is basically a work in progress. So, and of course, I've been away from the academia for quite some time. So, I have somehow probably missed certain points, but somehow now I'm I don't know how involved in the process itself. So hopefully I could perhaps look at it in a more practical and perhaps sensible way. Tuan-tuan dan puan sekalian, saya sebenarnya tidak mengikut sangat apa topik yang diberikan, yang dikatakan sebagai people-centered reform, because it's quite a strange thing, because Parliament is basically the symbol of popular sovereignty. Yeah, so to say that the reform ought to be or should be people-centered is a bit odd, because basically it's something that is rooted or comes from the people, so it shouldn't be, so it's very strange. Yeah, jadi sebagai Parlimen, sebagai suatu sumber kedaulatan rakyat, kita sekarang nak bercakap reformasi yang berdasarkan kedaulatan rakyat, agak pelik lah, seolah-olah Parlimen itu sudah di-hijack untuk menjadi benda lain. Nah, itu maksud saya. Teman-teman sekalian, saya bermula dengan menyebut bahawa ada 3 fungsi utama Parlimen, iaitu membuat undang-undang, meneliti ataupun menyemak perbelanjaan awam, dan yang ketiga menyediakan platform untuk kerajaan yang ada, sitting government, accountable kepada rakyat. Ya, jadi 3 perkara itu. Ya. Yang buat undang-undang itu biasalah, kita tahu rutin Parlimen dan DUN juga. Kemudian meneliti public expenditure, perbelanjaan awam, ya, melalui belanjawan, melalui PAC dan sebagainya. Dan yang ketiga, menyediakan platform untuk kerajaan yang memerintah, ya, menjadi accountable kepada rakyat melalui ahli-ahli Parlimen ataupun ahli-ahli DUN. Ya. Ini satu perkara yang sedikit pelik oleh kerana dalam masa yang sama, kita hari ini bercakap soal doktrin pemisahan kuasa ataupun doktrin separation of powers, yang saya fikir ramai yang terkeliru. Ya. Bila pejabat AG nak dipisahkan di antara fungsi mendakwa dengan fungsi penasihat, pun orang sebut doktrin pemisahan kuasa. Itu salah sebenarnya, tak betul. Ya. Tapi maklum sajalah oleh kerana menteri kita pun bukan dalam undang-undang kan, ataupun yang lulus undang-undang kadang-kadang keliru juga. Jadi separation of powers itu 3 perkara saja. Parlimen, eksekutif dan judiciary. Itu. Yang lain itu bukan separation of powers. Mungkin namanya separation of powers, tapi tidak merujuk kepada separation of powers dalam konteks yang kita sebutkan. Dan Parlimen kita, ya, sebagai sebuah sistem Westminster, is not strictly applying doctrine of separation powers the way the Americans do. Ya, sebab itu Perdana Menteri duduk di situ. Kalau mengikut doktrin yang sebenar itu tak betul, sebab eksekutif tak boleh duduk dalam legislature. Tetapi kita mengikut British system kan. Jadi dalam dunia ini ada 2 sistem, satu Westminster system, satu lagi presidential system. Ya. Sebab itu sebenarnya rakyat di Malaysia ataupun di negara-negara Westminster, dia tidak memilih kerajaan sebenarnya, dia memilih ahli parlimen, dan ahli parlimen yang majority form the government. Ya. Berbeza dengan Amerika atau Indonesia ataupun Philippines. They directly elect their president, the chief executive. Kemudian kabinet dia dilantik dari luar Kongres ataupun luar MPR. Tak ada kena-mengena dengan legislature. But here, ya, menteri kita datang daripada parlimen. EXO datang daripada DUN. Nampak? Ini yang kita kena faham. Okey, jangan pening pula. Baru tak betul ya. Tak apa. It's okay. Sebab dalam konteks Westminster, the separation of powers itu dia orang kata fuse, not strict atau watertight seperti di Amerika. Ya, jadi itu yang kadang-kadang kita nak buat reform dan sebagainya. You got to understand that. Jadi Datuk Speaker tadi sebut soal nak reform. Pada saya tak perlu sangat pun. Kita penambah baik saja. Sebab kalau reform sangat, nak pancung sana cantai sini, nak jadi apa kan tak? Dan kalau kita bukan pakar bidang itu, hancur nanti. Jadi tikus baiki labu. Yang saya nampak sekarang, the system is okay, the system is fine. It's the problem with us. We don't operate the system using the manual. We don't use the manual. Kita bawa ikut suka ya. Typical Malaysian lah. Bukan? Orang lain bawa Mercedes tak berlanggar pun. Kita bawa hancur, kemik sana sini bukan tak? Jadi itu yang problem dengan kita ni. So hopefully this seminar would provide the opportunity for us, the platform for us to have some idea of what was parliamentary reform is all about. Hopefully that our parliament will become more assertive, ya, dan sesuai dengan peranan dia sebagai satu platform yang sebenarnya, ya, yang jadi antara perkara yang saya sebut dalam di sini, ya, saya terpaksa sebutkan balik satu overview apa sebabnya parlimen kita itu spesifik ataupun special, ya, sebab kita ada sejarah kita sendiri, ya. Parlimen, kalau kita nak sebut atau nak define parlimen dia ada tiga. Yang pertama, kalau dalam konteks Malaysian Parliament, ada yang Tuan Agong, kemudian di bawah itu ada Senate, dan yang ketiga ialah Dewan Rakyat, ya. Tetapi ini sebenarnya lebih kepada suatu general position about legal process, ya. Itu bagaimana cara bil atau rang undang-undang itu menjadi undang-undang. Jadi daripada Dewan Rakyat selalunya kepada Dewan Negara, lepas itu kepada Yang Pertuan Agong untuk diberikan royal assent dan menjadi undang-undang. Tetapi ada ketika, terutamanya kalau undang-undang yang melibatkan bidang perlembagaan, dia melibatkan proses yang lain, termasuk the consent of the Conference of Rulers, ataupun kalau melibatkan Sabah dan Sarawak, the concurrence daripada TYT. Jadi ini satu perkara yang only in Malaysia we have got this process. So in other words, Parliament may become or may change the formation according to the function it's functioning or it's carrying out. Jadi lain kalau when Parliament is, for example, amending the constitution pertaining to the Sabah and Sarawak, then yes, to include the head of state of that two Borneo state, which now are being called as they're different from the Peninsula state. So Sabah and Sarawak are basically partners in the federation, not members of the federation. So ada special sikit lah, ya. Tuan-tuan sekalian, tetapi apapun saya setuju dengan Datuk tadi mengatakan bahawa reformasi itu perlu. Oleh kerana kalau kita tengok daripada sejarah pun, ya, bermula bertahun 1959 atau mungkin kalau kita boleh imbas tahun 55, daripada 52 ahli sekarang sudah jadi 222. Jadi dia mewakili suatu negara yang saiznya sudah berbeza daripada tahun 55. So we have progressed, we have grown from a small nation to become a big one. So that is in itself an indication that we've got to rebrand ourselves. We've got to, peranan itu harus dilihat dan effectiveness terutamanya harus dilihat. Dan saya menyebut juga soal reform, two type of reform. First, internal reform. The other one is external reform. I personally feel if you're talking about external reform, then it involves perhaps relationship with other institutions, including the Conference of Rulers and so on. Or, as I said earlier, the way we look at the powers given to the head of state of the two Borneo states. Because the issue here is, some people have been asking, or rather put up the question, whether it is democratic, it is legitimate to give unelected institution power, for example, to stop bills. This is main question. Jadi, reform itu, kalau kita serious about reform ataupun we are doing a study on reform, these are some of the issues that we got to answer. Ya, begitu juga dengan soal whether we should allow unelected rulers to have a say about certain things. Yang kita tahu, ya, hari ini ada ISET di luar sana. Ya. Jadi isu ialah maknanya Parlimen Malaysia tidak seperti Parlimen UK. Ya. Of course, again, we have a different system. Our Parliament is not supreme. It's not in the manner British Parliament is, yeah, because they don't have written constitution, so they are basically the supreme or the sovereign legislature. Unlike here in Malaysia, created by the constitution, and its powers are subject to the provision of the constitution. And this is where you have got to understand that why that it has to, or rather we have institution outside Parliament which sometimes can even veto bills passed by Parliament. Yeah? Itu kalau external reform. But internal reform, I think, is much easier, and this is where I think you have got to or this is where this rebranding or this reinvention takes place. Maknanya soal tadi tu soal apa nama tu standing orders, ya, perintah tetap yang perlu dirubah dan sebagainya. But then saya nak sebutkan juga, saya rasa masalahnya bukan dengan perintah tetap itu. Masalahnya adalah sama ada MPs ataupun ADUN faham atau tidak. Bukan. Soalnya sama ada speaker itu melaksanakan tugasnya mengikut semangat dan kehendak perintah tetap itu. Sebab pengalaman singkat saya dalam DUN, bukan masalah perintah tetap itu, tetapi dia nak bising kan, become unruly and using unparliamentary words and so on. Itu yang problem dia. So this is why you got to have some comparative studies and see in what way that these standing orders can be improved otherwise. Tapi yang saya nampak tidak ada keperluan yang mendesak untuk melihat ataupun untuk merubah standing orders itu, dan saya fikir pun kalau nak kata word by word itu barangkali agak over kan, tetapi saya fikir tak beza dengan the standing orders House of Commons, ya. Cuma yang saya nampak, saya tak sebut di sini, mungkin handset itu perlu ditengoklah, sebab saya pernah membuat sedikit kajian mengenai beberapa isu berhubung yang terpaksa melihat handset. Saya tak tahu sekarang, tapi satu ketika dahulu tak ada indeks, ya. Berbeza kalau kita nak melihat debate dalam House of Commons ataupun House of Lords. Dia senang sebab dia ada indeks dia. Cukup cantik dibahagikan jadi mengikut subjek dan sebagainya. Tapi kalau kita tengok Parlimen Malaysia, kalau nak cari satu isu tu, ya, ni Datuk speaker ada Melaka pun ada. Satu hari, sebab tempat ini kena tengok semua, bukan tak? Jadi kalau kita nak tengok isu on defence, home affairs ataupun rural development, kan, atau education, jadi tak dibagikan siap-siap begitu, ya. Jadi ini satu perkara yang saya fikir menyusahkan kita, dan di sini yang saya tengok susah kita nak menilai prestasi parlimen ataupun quality parlimen itu, ya, sebab kita tidak mempunyai suatu pentadbiran ataupun suatu perjalanan yang cantik seperti mana negara yang lain. Dan saya berasa malu bila compare dengan pre-merdeka, before the independence, saya tengok the Hansard are much better sekarang banding dengan post-merdeka. So instead of going forward, Dr. Dennis, we are going backward, ya. Jadi di situ satu area yang saya fikir tidak melibatkan ahli parlimen, tidak melibatkan speaker, tetapi saya fikir parlimen itself. And this is where I find that the proposal to bring back parliamentary service is indeed timely and very good, ya. Supaya parlimen itu dapat betul-betul autonomous, ya. Dan di sini saya fikir kita perlu melihat legislation outside Westminster system. Satu perkara yang saya cukup tertarik bila saya pernah pergi ke Germany, ya, bukan saja di sana itu the notion of separation of powers being applied strictly and followed, strictly, tetapi juga even the building is physically they are separate, ya. Kalau tak salah saya dia somewhere in toward the south in Germany. Oleh kerana mereka belajar dari pengalaman zaman Hitler dahulu, jadi sampai begitu sekali mereka apply the notion of separation of powers, begitu kan. Jadi kita harus belajar dan melihat itu. Maknanya selain daripada parlimen di India ataupun di London ataupun di Australia, we should also go to Germany, we go to Japan, kan, negara yang lain, untuk melihat bagaimana apakah sistem yang kita boleh belajar. Sebab saya nak maklumkan, contoh bila krisis perlembagaan berlaku tahun 93 dahulu, we cannot find the solution within Westminster system. We got to go abroad. We got to go beyond the system. We got to go to America. We got to go to Thailand. We got to go to Japan. Yeah, where the head of state can veto bills passed by Parliament. Yeah, saya rasa di sana ada perkara yang kita boleh belajar, dan kita tidak harus dalam konteks reformasi parlimen ini membataskan presiden ataupun modal kita hanya kepada London, Canberra ataupun New Delhi. Kita kena juga melihat Umpamanya kalau kita nak tengok kedudukan speaker, why not kita pergi ke Kongres dan House of Representatives in Washington ataupun di Thailand, dalam ASEAN sendiri kan. Jadi kalau untuk buat kajian tu cukup cantik lah. Sebab tu kadang-kadang saya merasa kalau nak malas jadi politik, balik akademik and then can do something about this. Ya, kita boleh buat benda lain yang saya rasa lebih banyak gunanya daripada terpikir-pikir landawan. Ya, jadi itu antara benda yang saya rasa kita boleh bangkitkan. Satu lagi perkara ialah yang disebut tadi soal select committee, jawabkan satu pilihan. Saya fikir baiklah, ya. Ini satu perkara yang menunjukkan kita serius, ya, dalam soal untuk memperkasa dan memperbaiki parlimen, ya. Kita juga melihat beberapa amalan seperti alternative budget, ya, budget alternatif. Something yang baik yang telah dimulakan oleh Pakatan Rakyat dan diteruskan oleh Barisan Nasional sekarang, alhamdulillah. Kemudian mungkin satu lagi ialah pembentukan shadow cabinet, ya. Jadi dengan cara itu kita akan melihat the emergence of serious MPs, ya. Jadi dia bukan masuk parlimen untuk buang masa saja, duk cerita, duk maki hamun orang kan. Itu satu perkara yang betul, walaupun kita harus juga melihat bagaimana nak membentuk, how to form this shadow cabinet, kan. Ini satu perkara yang saya fikir kita harus belajar dan bukan sesaja saja kan. Tetapi saya melihat bahawa making the government accountable would be more systematic and perhaps effective dengan adanya shadow cabinet ini, sebab minister yang memegang portfolio itu akan terpaksa berhadapan dengan the opposition members who are given this task ataupun function dalam perkara tertentu, ya. Jadi di sini selain daripada Parliament itself, beberapa amalan ataupun culture ataupun budaya need to be put up. Yeah? You got to create a certain type of culture, parliamentary culture yang sesuai. Yeah? Walaupun tidak sebahagian dari parlimen itu, tetapi dengan adanya amalan seperti itu, dia akan jadi baik. Begitu juga dengan, saya tak sebut dalam paper, I don't mention, I forgot to mention about question time. Yeah? Perdana Menteri akan dipanggil tiap-tiap hari Minggu, hari Rabu tak salah di House of Commons untuk menjawab soalan. So dia tak boleh lari lah. Jadi kita ada common complaint, kata Perdana Menteri tak datang, kan? Orang kata sibuk, pada saya senang, sibuk tak saja di Perdana Menteri lah, atau sibuk tak saja di MB, kan? Because ini nilai baru yang kita kena perkukuhkan. Bukan soal nak dengki, bukan soal nak marah, kan. Tak ada stamina, get out lah, itu saja. Very simple. Bukan. Nampak kasar lah kan, tapi dah memang nilai dia begitu, kan. After May the 9 kita kena buat kerja kita dengan cara yang lain lah, tak macam dulu lah, bukan. Mana kalau dia kata, oh, saya hidup jabat, saya monitor. Bukan itu, that's not the meaning of, engagement ataupun accountability. Bukan. Oh, dia kata PM duduk dalam jabat, dia tengok. Dia bukan diktator. He is head of government in a democracy. Jadi nampak, culture yang sedemikian juga perlu, ya. Jadi live talika dan sebagainya, it's very important to increase the awareness and interest among the citizenry. Itu sangat penting, ya. Dan satu lagi perkara ialah soal sikap kita lah. Masalahnya kadang-kadang kalau kita bersungguh-sungguh nak buat, rakyat tak peduli, kan? Jadi susah juga. Dan saya nak sebut juga dalam saya sebutkan soal media. Kalau media tidak faham, wartawan yang those who are assigned to cover parliament don't understand the meaning of parliament, the function of parliament, then kita dapat we got craps in the papers. Benda-benda bukan isu, kan, dibawa dalam paper, dalam media. Jadi rakyat akan terkeliru, kan? Rakyat akan dipesongkan daripada main issue, ya. Di sini penting saya melihat media yang bertanggungjawab, media yang committed, media yang faham the meaning of reform as far as parliament is concerned. Itu penting. Walaupun tidak termasuk dalam kerangka reform yang kita sebutkan, tetapi saya fikir penting untuk kita menyokong supaya parlimen ataupun reformasi yang kita mulakan dan kita jalankan itu berkesan, ya. Sebab kalau parlimen membuat banyak perkara ataupun parti politik ataupun MP buat banyak inisiatif, tetapi kalau rakyat, kalau media tidak memberikan kerjasama, saya fikir dia tak akan berkesan dan tidak akan mendatangkan faedah. Ya. Tetapi saya fikir dengan keterbukaan, dengan iklim baru politik kita, dengan politik baru, new politics, then I am confident that eventually we will be there. Jadi kita akan dapat mencapai apa yang kita cita-citakan. Jadi sekarang ini kita bercakap macam-macam kan, kita nak katakan world class parliament lah, itulah inilah, tapi kita pun tak tahu what is the benchmark kan. Tetapi saya yakin kita menuju arah yang betul, dan di Malaysia ini terutamanya dengan sistem federation, dan I believe with all those speakers daripada parlimen, daripada dalam DUN mengadakan rutin conferences and meeting, itu dapat diperbaiki, dan saya fikir di sini penting untuk parlimen itu, dan kita harus memperkasakan institusi parlimen melalui speaker dan sebagainya, dan kita harus ingat bahawa parlimen dan juga DUN itu adalah sovereign, dan dia perlu sometimes assert the power. Ya. Jadi saya harap supaya speaker itu lebih tegas, dan dia kena faham kedudukan parlimen, dia sama ada setaraf atau lebih tinggi daripada mahkamah. Dia boleh, he can punish contempt. Ya. Jadi kalau ada ahli ataupun orang di luar, rakyat yang berkelakuan biadab kepada parlimen, saya fikir kita harus menunjukkan ketegasan. Sebab kalau tidak, dia ingat parlimen ni apa kan? Boleh dihina, boleh dipermain-mainkan begitu kan. Sesekali kita harus tunjukkan kuasa itu. Bukan tapi kalau tak buat, orang tak faham. So I happen to have my ex-student as the speaker. So kadang-kadang masa minum saya bagi tahu lah, buat begini. Kalau ada yang dah cross the line, you got to whack him or her kan. So kalau tidak, nanti apa guna ada standing orders kan? Ya. Dan yalah, kita pun tak ada masa nak faham kan. Maknanya kadang-kadang dia baca peraturan tu in isolation from the entire standing order kan. Jadi di sini penting speaker dengan pegawai dia untuk terus melihat itu. Ya. Jadi jangan masa sidang saja pakai standing orders, tapi memang susahlah. Lebih kan. Pasal banyak kerja lain kan. Tapi saya fikir untuk memastikan bahawa parliamentary reform ini dapat efektif, kita harus berkorbanlah terutama untuk fasa pertama ini. Selepas PRU 14, kita harus tunjukkan bahawa sekurang-kurangnya di dalam parlimen ini ada perubahan. Dan saya fikir ini sangat penting, ya. Dan oleh kerana dia tidak melibatkan kos yang banyak. Beza dengan kalau nak janji nak mansuh tol kan, PTPTN itu melibatkan kos yang banyak, dan dalam keadaan kita ada 1 trilion national debt, payah kan. Tapi hal-hal seperti ini saya rasa kita boleh buat tanpa memerlukan kos, dan boleh katakan almost instantly we can do it kan. Dengan serta-merta kita boleh buat supaya sekurang-kurangnya ada perubahan. Jadi ini yang rakyat nampak, dan saya fikir kita perlu sedar bahawa mereka memerhati kita. Mereka semua nak berubah daripada ini yang penting daripada 9 Mei itu. Semua daripada eksekutif, Dewan Perundangan dan Badan Kehakiman, ya. Masing-masing menunjukkan kesungguhan untuk berubah, untuk tidak sama macam dulu kan. Jadi ini satu perkara yang penting, dan kita mengharapkan supaya parlimen di hadapan dalam soal ini, dan saya rasa dengan adanya bil parliamentary service, saya harap dapat dipercepatkan, ya. Kita akan melihat satu parlimen yang bebas. Jadi kita tak mahu lagi parlimen ini dijaga oleh menteri tertentu, sebab itu salah bagi saya. Bagaimana parlimen dimonitor ataupun dijaga oleh seorang menteri kan, yang sepatutnya parlimen itu jaga kerajaan. The government should be subservient to parliament. That is the right way of relationship between the executive and the house. Because the government must always have this mandate, this support in Parliament. But you go back to the Constitution, you see the provision that if the Prime Minister or the Menteri Besar ceases to have the majority the support in the House, then he or she must tender resignation immediately. Jadi maknanya di situ menunjukkan bahawa Parliament ataupun DUN itu actually is the one that monitor the government, not the other way around. Ini yang kadang-kadang kita terlepas pandang. Cuma the problem, of course, is because in the Westminster system is the majority party that form the government. That is the problem. Kan? Jadi kita bentuk kerajaan daripada di situ. Itu sebab yang saya rasa inevitable that somehow Parliament become subservient to the government. The other way around when. So that is the problem, actually. I mean, the problem is in a way is inherent in the system itself. So this is where sometimes I think we need the judiciary, you need the media, you need the people at large to make sure that this institution actually play the role. And this is where you find this notion of check and balance. Check and balance sebenarnya kadang-kadang kuasa yang sah tetapi dilaksanakan, di-exercise dengan cara yang tidak betul. Itu yang timbulnya the notion of judicial review, check and balance sebagainya untuk memastikan bahawa perlembagaan ini tidak jam. Ya? Jadi dengan kata-kata itu, Datuk Speaker, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Yang berhormat Dr. Aziz Bahari selaku the first speaker dalam sesi ini. Saya nak buka terus floor ini kepada sesi soal jawab dan saya tak apa, masa tu ada pada speaker. Siapa yang nak bertanya tolong sekejap, tak apa, webinar lah. Yang nak bertanya saya nak bagi 3 soalan, kemudian jawab, kemudian lagi 3 soalan. Jadi tolong tekan butang di mic itu. Saya nak tengok berapa orang yang nak bertanya. One, first, second, lagi 3, 4. Speaker ni dia kena mata dia begitu. Jadi saya silakan 3 soalan yang pertama. Sila, Wabi Nolela. In English or in Malay, no problem.
Even before kita luluskan pada November sitting, tapi maknanya mana-mana ketua menteri di masa yang lepas ataupun akan datang dihadkan. Lagi satu yang kita telah banyak berbincang dan juga about 2 days ago ialah dan saya juga telah mencadangkan based on the discussion yang kita buat ialah mencadangkan kursi tambahan untuk wanita, maknanya women only additional seats. So di Pulau Pinang sebagai contohnya kita ada 40 seats. So kalau kita tambah 8 seat ni yang baru menjadikan 48 seats. 8 seats ni hanya untuk wanita sahaja. Ini satu cara untuk meningkatkan perwakilan wanita di dalam DUN, dan saya nak mencadangkan bagi Parlimen, since menengok kepada reformasi Parlimen, sama ada sistem kursi tambahan untuk wanita sahaja ataupun women only additional seats ni boleh dibincangkan dalam jawatankuasa perlembagaan seperti mana yang dicadangkan dalam jawatankuasa perlembagaan di DUN Pulau Pinang. Pengurusi saya iaitu Ketua Menteri hayat kata jika parti-parti bersetuju seperti apa yang kita telah lakukan untuk hadkan tempoh Ketua Menteri, kalau parti-parti bersetuju dan maknanya cadangan to have women only seats ni ataupun kerusi hanya untuk wanita ni boleh
hopefully diluluskan. Kenapa saya cadangkan begini ialah selalunya kerusi-kerusi di parlimen ataupun di DUN kebanyakan ni dominated by men ataupun lelaki, dan selalunya mereka ni telah bekerja keras dan tak ada siapa nak melepaskan seat untuk bagi kepada wanita. Jadi satu cara untuk mengatasi masalah ini ialah supaya ada 8 kerusi additional seats tu memang untuk wanita. Jadi tidak perlu ada rasa macam seats mereka, kerusi mereka tu diambil hanya untuk bagi kepada wanita. Sebab kalau nak sekarang ni, kalau nak achieve 30% dengan cara yang lama mungkin susah, tapi kalau 8 additional seats tanpa kadun ataupun tanpa parlimen. Terima kasih.
Okey, terima kasih. Silakan Dato'.
Okey, nama saya Denison Jayasuriya. Terima kasih Prof atas pembentangan kertas yang komprehensif dan juga boleh dikatakan frank and open reflection. Saya nak minta pandangan tentang Senate. Bolehkah, sebab dalam kertas kerja yang saya baca dalam bahasa Inggeris ada sentuh kepada beberapa perkara, tetapi sekarang kami melihat Senate tidak memainkan peranan yang sepatutnya sebagai check and balance dan juga pemilihan ahli senator atau appointment. Saya ingat awalnya is to give balance dengan state. Sekarang state representation 2 sahaja, dan kalau dibanding dengan kerajaan appointment banyak lagi. So bolehkah kita adakan satu sistem di mana pemilihannya berbeza ataupun lebih closer to federal constitution, di mana wakil-wakil minority ataupun juga representation dari kumpulan-kumpulan seperti akademik, maybe bekas military, civil service dan sebagainya, supaya mereka boleh memainkan satu peranan. Dan saya juga setuju dalam kertas kerja bahawa it shouldn't become a backdoor entry to cabinet. Terima kasih.
Last untuk sesi yang pertama, ya sila.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nama saya Awangku Fikri, saya daripada UIA, pelajar undang-undang daripada UIA. Okay, so kepada Dr. Aziz Bari okay, let me ask question in English so that our honorable guest from Australia can understand. Okay, my question is related to the opening by Dato' Rezwan just now. Is about they said that there's some debate that somehow they are doing in a negative manner and in negative words. Okay, so I want to ask whether this situation is caused by the parliamentary privilege that vested in the Article 63 Clause 2, which is saying that MPs has this immunity, but in Clause 4, it says that it is subjected to Seditious Act, and whether this reformation of parliamentary could also see or amend something in this federal constitution and regarding of this parliamentary privilege. So that's all my question.
Okey, terima kasih. 3 soalan yang pertama. Cuma kita ada juga soalan daripada online ni. Soalannya, apakah peranan rakyat dalam usaha pemerkasaan parlimen selain daripada keluar mengundi 5 tahun sekali? So apakah peranan rakyat untuk pemerkasaan parlimen? So sila Dr. Aziz.
So I'm not very clear about your question, student from what is your question basically? Negative
Whether that the MPs is actually they feel that they are protected by this immunity, by this Article 63.
All right, yes, yes.
Yeah, whether is this the really cause that leads them to act freely in the House of Parliament?
Well, of course, this privilege is given to the members of the House to make sure that they can perform, they can function effectively. And of course, there's no, because some people make issue that what if they abuse? That is, you have to accept it, right? And of course, I think this is related to what have just been mentioned by Datuk Speaker. It's for the rakyat, the people to monitor. If you've got this silly MPs, making use of his time in Parliament, his floor in Parliament to, to come up with vulgar or whatever it is, then next time around, make sure that this guy wouldn't get elected again. Because that is the only way to punish him, or to make sure that our Parliament is not, or don't have these characters. So, huh? There is a problem with democracy, I have to say. Yeah, jadi kalau macam itu, that you got to devise a means how to check these people, or rather how to balance or things up. Macam itulah. Maknanya kalau dah dia terlalu popular dan walaupun dia something ataupun walaupun dia kurang hajar tapi masih popular, dan itu, there is a problem with democracy, and this is where I can come to Datuk Janison punya question tadi kan, the Senate. But the Senate is even though it's a yawning chamber, some people call it, but don't forget, the Senate is there to do certain purpose, or to carry out certain function. It has certain role. Dia bukan, it's not similar with the Dewan Rakyat. Yeah, walaupun if you look at the power, overriding power given to the Rakyat to bypass the Senate, but still, when it comes to amendment of constitution, they are at par. So Senate is as powerful as Dewan Rakyat when it comes to amending the constitution. Yeah. Tetapi back to your question about the Senate. Yes, I agree with him. Because I think the problem is that 40 senators appointed by Dayang Tun Agong, itu yang backdoor issue. The backdoor issue, I'm sorry to my friends. Some of them are in the cabinet because of this, so-called backdoor. But point is point, law is law. Meaning to say that yes, you've got to make sure that you don't have this too often. Yeah, you nak lantik kawan-kawan jadi menteri, bukan? Ataupun lantik kawan-kawan yang kalah dalam election sebagainya, ataupun nak lantik orang yang tak dapat bertanding duduk jadi senator. It's not right lah. So it's for the people to act, because we must remember that the Reid Commission has clearly spelled out what is the purpose of Senate, and I think these 40 senators appointed by the Yang Tun Agong must be done by the what they call it, the group. Military veterans, atau artists, or OKU, or whatever, orang asli. Then they must conduct their own, perhaps, election or whatever, so that we don't appoint yes men to represent this group, bukan? Sebab ini yang jadi problem, bukan? Umpamanya seniman, kan? The artists don't recognize the guy who has been appointed to represent them as their people or their men, kan? Jadi why not seniman umpamanya buat satu election, then put up to the government. This is kita punya senator. Or Yuska dealer ke, bukan tak? Persatuan Pengulu, whatever lah. So what I'm saying is that kita devise satu system untuk make sure that what is there in the constitution would be properly or correctly implement. Kalau tidak, nanti sampai bila pun dia tak berubah, bukan? Datuk Presiden kan? So I guess that's because I don't think making everything elected would do the trick, right? Because election is number one is expensive, time consuming, and I think there's danger of people are being, if you are too popular, even though you are basically no brain, but because you're popular, you get elected. And this is the problem and the danger with elections. So I don't think election will solve everything or do the trick. We need to say that we've got to make sure that the original intent, the intention of the framers of the constitution are there. Ya, jadi saya ingat memang senator kita memerlukan revamp, but at the moment I think it's good because you have got the government dominating the lower house, so let the upper house dominated or rather by someone else. This is the ideal of check and balance. Even though I know it's hard time for the sitting government, but that's it. That's democracy. I mean, even though I belong to Pakatan Harapan, I think I still. I mean, I would like to see the constitution is put in place. Right? So yes, we should spend more time on Senate to make sure that the taxpayers get value for their money. As far as the situation in Penang, I think it's okay to limit the chief ministership to 2 terms. And I guess you don't have to do it through constitution. Just like in Sabah some time ago, they rotate the chief minister post among parties without amending the constitution. Maybe you guys would just want to show to your people that you are serious about it, but I think it can be done without amending the constitution. Orang masa buat apa kan? Sometimes problem LA kita ni pun bukan bagi advice, dia ikut the government what the government is saying. Sorry to the YBLA lah. Dia takut dengan exco pula. But as for your point, your second point, I'm sorry, I don't think that's right. I mean, yes, I mean, I understand your point, but let's remember that we must avoid, we must limit this, what do you call it, yeah? Apa panggil tu? Special position to the minimum. What I'm saying is this, you kata nak special seat for women kan, that is unconstitutional. Why? Because Melayu saja, India saja, orang asli saja, it is against the constitution because constitution promotes equality. So you got to fight. That's the answer. I'm sorry. You cannot have a situation whereby women only sit. No. That is against the constitution. If you answer we cannot win, then do it other ways. Then, because if you reserve seats for that, then it will become problematic. Macam di Sabah dulu kan. The winning party would be able to appoint another 6 members. And it become a problem. No? This is where I think. This is why I think the position of the Senate must be maintained, must be fulfilled. Because we have the Senate as the answer. Untuk make sure that all these laws or the groups being represented, this underrepresented. Meaning, basically Senate ni is the place where you allow people who cannot win election to have their representative. So kalau you kata masalah wanita ni tak boleh menang ataupun dewan being dominated by male, so I am afraid you got to find the answer elsewhere, not by reserving seats for them. Because now we are having problem. Because I have to admit, defending 153 is not enough. A special position of the Malays is something that is anomalous. We have to accept that. Ini I said di luar marah lah kan. But I mean, the constitution anywhere in the world promotes equality as far as possible. So kalau you nak special position, you nak handicap, susah lah. Okay. So jangan kata saya again answer pula, tapi that is the answer lah. I mean, kita sedapat yang mungkin provide or rather limit that, because I think the constitution is already too heavy with this special this, special that. Dan saya fikir lagi banyak dibuat, dan kan lagi susah internationally kita nak jawab.
Okay, next 3 question. Sekejap. Oi, banyak, ramai. Kita bagi pada ni belah pembangkang dulu.
Bukan kita.
Di sebelah ni pembangkang. Sila. Perkenalkan diri.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Huzaifah. I'm also from Ahmad Ibrahim Kuliah of Laws, IIUM. So a bit different question compared to my other colleagues, which asked about the very technical of constitution. My question would be on, because from my extensive readings and my humble readings of critics like Wa'il Khalaq and also Carl Smith and all, that I'd like to quote from Daryl Jens Levinson, which stated that from nearly the start of the American Republic, the separation of powers as the framers understood it and as contemporary constitutional law continues to understand it, had ceased to exist. So from all these extensive readings, what I'm trying to understand, the dilemma or identity crisis that Malaysia currently face, is that we try to reconciling our tradition and historical background of this nation, and also the Westphalian and all this Westminster from this alien concept from the European imposing into our this constitution system and all. And we find it there's a problem in it. The way from the framers understand it, and our framers, like you said, Lord Reid, and also we try to best this parliament and all to understand what the Lord Reid, and does it, my question is, who dictates this understanding? Is it the judiciary? If it's judiciary, then it raises another problem, which is, does the judiciary represents the will of the people? Understand of the constitution that, for example, in Malaysia, we have clauses like Islam is the federal religion and all. This is something alien to other countries like Australia or England and so on. So who do we refer? Because this modern nation state is a new thing. It doesn't exist until this late century of 20th, 19th and all. So that is my first, probably. And if I may add, my second is that since the emergence of the China posing and putting an illiberal concept of nation that may prosper in a sense, does this provide us a way to explore different alternatives rather than this what we're trying to upheld? If this the thing or the system that we believe is not adequate for us. Thank you.
Okay, make it short. Bagi Datuk Speaker Melaka, kemudian yang ketiga, tidak, nanti next, Okay, sila. Ada pakai mic, Datuk Speaker.
Ya, saya dari Melaka. Dalam penyampaian oleh Dr. Aziz, banyak perkara-perkara telah disentuh. Ya. Tapi saya tertarik dengan perkara parliament culture, budaya parlimen. Ya. Sebelum tu, sebelum saya pergi ni, bila pengurusi cakap tadi pembangkang.
Melawak ya tu.
Betul melawak. Tapi kita di Melaka, saya tak gunakan perkataan pembangkang. Saya katakan ahli-ahli daripada bukan kerajaan. Ini satu transformasi juga. Pasal pada saya, bila kita panggil orang to opposition, jadi kerja dia tak ada kerja lain, nak membangkang aja. Sekalipun usul tu baik. Jadi saya ada mempunyai konotasi yang agak positif. Jadi saya panggil dia non-government member and government member. If the government members doing well, then the next time they will be elected. If they're not performing well, the non-government will take over the government. Alright, itu sebagai sampingan. Berkenaan dengan budaya dengan nah, apa yang menyebab dalam peraturan di Melaka lah, kita cukup banyak dia punya peraturan cukup untuk nak menimbulkan satu budaya yang sehat, yang positif. Tetapi akhirnya yang menyebabkan dia tu boleh baik ataupun tidak, they depend on the members of the parliament and also the members of the assembly. Then they make whether the culture is going to be positive or negative. It's the people. You know. It's not the Dewan, it's not the parliament, it's the people. Now, when you choose the wrong people. Now, definitely, the culture cannot be positive. What I mean to say, jadi macam mana, by kita punya sistem, Dr. Aziz kan, members of parliament, they are appointed purely on popularity. Just because they're popular. And to make popular is easy. They may not be capable. So, I feel, kalau kita punya parliament to really very authoritative, professional, I think the people who are going to be members of the parliament and also they must also be equally professional. They must be not popularity but capability. So boleh tidak sebagai satu transformasi, any member who macam student, you want to be a member of the, we have to ada criteria for selection to be a candidate, for example, not just depending on the party to elect. So the best, okay, because you are going to perform, because your performance depend on your capability, ya. Jadi probably boleh tak kita fikirkan benda itu supaya kita punya parlimen lebih profesional dan lebih akademik dan lebih mendatangkan. Terima kasih.
Okey, terima kasih. Okey, sila soalan yang ketiga.
Terima kasih kepada Tuan Datuk Speaker. Prof, saya Wan Anwar daripada Pejabat Speaker Dewan Rakyat, bekas mantan pelajar Prof. Ada tiga perkara Prof. Pertama sekali, tentang yang disebut tentang peruntukan kerusi untuk ahli dewan bagi pihak wanita yang YB Lela bangkitkan tadi itu. Sepaham saya, bila kita berjumpa dengan speaker daripada Terengganu, di dalam standing order Terengganu ada diperuntukkan perkara tersebut. Maksudnya tentang yang dipilih oleh Kerajaan Negeri Terengganu untuk certain group dalam untuk represent kepentingan masing-masing dalam dewan. Mungkin boleh dilihat isu inilah. Yang kedua, saya nak tanya tentang kedudukan parlimen. Ini berkaitan dengan usul yang dibawa oleh Port Dickson dua hari lepas tentang ketetapan yang harus diambil oleh parlimen berkenaan dengan isu ICERT. Jadi soalan saya adalah, apakah orang kata kekuatan parlimen itu, kedudukan parlimen itu, jikalau parlimen harus membuat satu ketetapan tentang isu yang telah pun diambil, telah dibuat keputusan oleh kabinet untuk tidak rektifikasi ICERT itu. Jadi adakah bila parlimen itu dah buat satu ketetapan melalui Dewan Rakyat, dia kuat dan punya legal effect or what not tentang satu isu yang hendak diputuskan oleh kerajaan? Di mana letaknya kedudukan parlimen di situ? Sebagaimana kuatnya parlimen, stand parlimen tentang isu tersebutlah, ataupun apa juga isu yang memerlukan satu ketetapan dibuat oleh parlimen. Yang ketiga, tentang kita ada bincang juga tentang sama ada maukah kita paparkan kehadiran ahli dewan semasa sidang supaya kita boleh beritahu dewan kepada rakyat dan pengundi bahawa kalau this YB ni tidak attend sidang dewan, maka kita pun boleh menunjukkan signal kepada masyarakat, rakyat dan pengundi untuk tidak mengundi lagi. Tetapi ada persoalan timbul Prof, iaitu kalaulah dilaksanakan mekanisme tersebut, dibimbangi bahawa kerajaan akan menjadi backfire kepada kerajaan, sebab terutama sekali Parliamentary. Sebab dikatakan bahawa dan difahamkan bila laksanakan mekanisme ini, ianya saya kata menteri sendiri kadang-kadang tu most of the time dia tidak ada dalam dewan. Jadi dilihat sebagai akan backfire. Jadi adakah pada pandangan Prof, kita masih lagi boleh laksanakan pendekatan sebegini untuk nak menunjukkan bahawa kepada rakyat yang ahli parlimen sepatutnya berada dalam dewan semasa sidang, dan kalaulah berlaku di mana menteri tidak hadir dalam banyak masa persidangan, adakah kita patut ambil kira pandangan untuk kita tidak melaksanakan pendekatan sebegitu? So adakah Prof, bagaimana Prof melihat isu inilah? Terima kasih.
Ada satu soalan online ni. How about implementing the Prime Minister question like in the UK Parliament, as it can show to the people that it is a freedom to synchronize the government through Prime Minister? Okay.
The first question is too academic, and probably you can come and do an appointment with me. I hope you understand what you're talking about. Okay, second one, Datuk tadi. culture, tapi saya rasa itu terpulang pada parti lah. Mungkin Datuk got the wrong signal from me kan. Maksud saya betul saya setuju dengan Datuk punya cadangan tadi, tapi politik is politics lah. Kita tak boleh nak regulate sangat sebab ya, itulah saya tak pasti praktikal itu tidak. Tapi cantik idea tu. Sebab saya nak sebut kita sistem kabinet kita kan, baik exco ataupun kabinet minister, dia bukannya mengikut expertise. Dia jadi menteri kerana dia ahli parlimen. Dia bukan sistem Amerika. Maknanya kalau dia presiden, dia boleh appoint Secretary of State for Agriculture, orang yang pakar pertanian. Di sini tidak. Why? Because we have got the civil service. Sama juga, Menteri Kesihatan tak sepertinya medical doctor. Bukan? Sebab ada civil service. Minister come and go. Dia cuma responsible for the ministry in parliament. Nak jawab ahli parlimen. Jadi sistem kita berlainan. Ya, jadi nak regulate sampai macam itu, saya rasa susah juga. Tapi depend lah. Kalau majority nak regulate macam itu, then my fear is that we become too bureaucratized. Yeah? Sebab parlimen dia a different function, and the ideal is not about making the ministers ataupun having ministers who are expert in the field. The ministers are there to make sure that the policies, implementation, everything being scrutinized and action being made accountable. Itu saja. Ya. Kemudian soal tadi yang Saudara Wan Anwar sebutkan, ya, saya rasa bolehlah kalau yang Dapat Terengganu itu kan dia pelantikan berdasarkan, itu sebenarnya pelantikan dibuat oleh kerajaan. Tapi it's up to the government to put up a policies as to the criteria of appointment. So kalau dia rasa the non-Muslim ke wanita ke being having no representation, then maybe dia lantik senator daripada kalangan itu, kan? Bergantung pada keperluan semasa. So sangat baiklah. Yang itu soal ISET. What is the question?
Ni Prof, berkenaan dengan sesuatu ketetapan yang dibuat oleh Parlimen, adakah kuat walaupun isu itu telah diputuskan di peringkat kabinet. Yeah. Jadi perlu tak lagi satu ketetapan itu perlu dibuat di peringkat Parlimen Dewan Rakyat lah untuk satu isu yang harus diputuskan oleh kerajaan.
Okay. To me it's no harm. Why not? When? Sebab under the constitution is for the government. The power is the government to ratify everything. Itu government punya kuasa. Executive power kan. So it's up to Parliament to scrutinize. Betul juga, mungkin it's good thing. So it's up to, or rather open to MPs whether to agree or not, or probably to make it more detailed or whatever, put up questions. Yeah? Sebab the idea of having Parliament, or rather the idea of having a government responsible to Parliament, is for the government to answer as to why they have decided whether to approve or otherwise certain international instrument. So saya rasa that's okay. Yang ketiga soal nak memaparkan attendance dia. Ini pun to me is open question. Sebab itu terpulang pada rakyat lah. Kalau rakyat faham, saya rasa tak ada masalah. Tapi isunya ialah saya yang problem besar. This is something I have no answer. Tapi saya cuma boleh detailkan mengapa jadi begitu kan. Sebab orang melihat ahli parlimen kita ni pegawai kebajikan. Itu yang problem dia. Bukan? So dia kena tengok orang sakit, bukan? Tengok orang aksiden, rumah terbakar dan sebagainya kan. Tapi sekarang kadang-kadang saya tengok jadi gimmick lah. Dia bukan selalu pun pergi tengok orang sakit tu. Kan jadi macam hipokrit pula kan. Cuma itu, that is a problem. Pasal dia nak menang pilihan raya. Sebab kalau dia tak turun, nanti tuduhan lain pula. Ini menteri tak pernah turun. Kan? Jadi kita kadang-kadang we are being unfair to them. Kita nak dia jadi apa kan? So, what do you want your MPs to be? Jack of all trades, benda? It's everywhere. Orang sakit kena di situ. Accident dia kena di situ. And you nak dia top kat sini. Dia tidur pun dia marah. Dia letih. Letih, kawan. They are tired, Tapi dah tua kan, makin tak ada. So kita nak jadi apa ni kan? So it's you jawablah. Bukan tak? You nak jadi, you want your MPs to be Superman, Superwoman. That's crazy, I think. Tak boleh. So you kena expect dia nak datang selalu. Dia banyak tugasan. Kalau dia daripada Kuala Kedah, jauh tu
Especially from Sabah.
But the problem is, you got to go back there to look after your constituency. Kan? Kambing beranak pun nak tengok. So that our culture has, I think we got some problem with our culture, our mindset. So we are making things difficult and impossible to do. So Parliament actually, ideally MPs, they are lawmakers. Tak? Ahli Parlimen ke, adun, mereka adalah pembuat undang-undang. Kan? To scrutinize policies and so on. Bukan nak pergi tengok orang sakit. But then at the same time, our electoral system is such that first past the post. So we are caught here. I have no answer. I must not pretend that I've got the answer. So I throw it back to you and look at this. You solve. Tak? So kita nak jadi apa ni? Itu je. I don't think we can expect our MPs to become Superman, Superwoman. Buat semua sekali. Tak boleh. Kalau you nak dia jadi pegawai kebajikan, then you must let him or her tidur dalam dewan. Okay? You jangan insist on attendant. Saya rasa dia attendant, dia ambil duit tu dia bagi pada pesakit mak dia. Bagi budak miskin. Tu kan? So, politics is about that. And of course, we cannot do away with the system because without politics, we cannot make MPs accountable. Tak? Itu problem. And then if you have people sitting here as MPs who are not elected, they become out of touch. Now I understand why, or rather the necessity of having politicians sitting in the board because they are at least elected. After every 5 years, they'll go back to show their report card. To the nation. At least, every 5 years you got to show your report card to your pengundi or to the nation. At least ada system. Kalau semua ni lantikkan, appointees, they couldn't care less about you. There's a problem with our PBT now. Of course, some people argue and debate, why must we have politicians? Why can't we have planners, engineers, architects sitting in the board? Okay, it's fine. But they are not. When you have people who are not elected, they couldn't care less about you. The beauty or the good thing of politicians is they respect you. They count him. You professor ke, you PhD ke, you go to kampung, you are just wakil rakyat. Betul. Dia tak peduli you doktor ke, you profesor, peduli apa kan. You are yang berhormat. You must serve me. You must serve us. I remember one story, dia ni adun lah. Dia kata, this is not my job. Ni parliament. I don't care, I voted for you. And of course, this is the culture, but good or bad, this is something that make them accountable. And this is what Parliament is all about. Okay.
Terima kasih Profesor Dr. Aziz Bari. Tuan-tuan, masa tidak mengizinkan. Kita ada 5 minit.
Datuk.
Sebelum.
Boleh Datuk.
Banyaknya 1, 2, 3, 4.
Buat visi lah.
Soalan ringkas-ringkas ya?
Ringkas. Pasal saya seronok tengok Dr. Aziz Bari menjiwai real politik. Tapi masa presentation tadi macam nak balik semula ke akademik. Okay, now very quickly, Datuk Pengurusi, because saya percaya tujuan seminar hari ini dibuat ialah untuk supaya Parlimen ni jadi lebih segar lah, lebih merakyat. No, saya ada 3 perkara je untuk minta Profesor Dr. Aziz Bari untuk beri reaksi. Pertama, dalam because this is the second time tak silap saya Parlimen menganjurkan seminar to reform the Parliament. Number one is kita ada apa yang dipanggil Parliamentary Service Act 1963 yang kemudian dimansuhkan pada 1992. Now, dalam banyak perbincangan untuk reform parlimen ini, supaya parlimen ini ada autonomi sedikit, dia ada kaitan dengan this act untuk di-revive semula. So what's your comment? That's number one. Number two ialah supaya parlimen ini kita boleh empowering the rakyat ni, nak melibatkan especially the civil society. Dia ada dua halangan dia. Satu, the standing order, kan, peraturan tetap tu. Dan yang ketiganya ialah, can we devise an SOP lah, ada satu standard operating procedure whereby the select committee boleh ada can be connected to NGOs or any civil society movement nak contribute kepada mana-mana bills ataupun act yang akan dibentangkan Parlimen.
Okey, terima kasih. Will be Senator Ismail. Sila Hadi. Ringkas-ringkas Hadi.
Hadi, penyelidik Parlimen. Saya ringkas saja, Doktor. Pertama, sebab saya nak komen tentang, sebab saya pernah buat fellowship di Parlimen India dan juga di Goa State Legislative Assembly. So pengalaman saya, strategically political party akan letak lebih banyak calon wanita di peringkat negeri sebelum dibawa ke Parlimen. Sebab itu adalah salah satu strategi parti politik lah. Yang kedua, saya nak berkaitan dengan senator Dewan Negara tu. Kalau kita lihat bahawa kita ada loophole kat situ, iaitu di mana kita berikan kuasa kepada Perdana Menteri untuk menasihati Yang di-Pertuan Agong untuk memilih 44 senator di dalam Dewan Negara. Apakah boleh kita gunakan mekanisme seperti mana kita buat Judicial Appointment Committee, yang mana kuasa daripada kuasa Perdana Menteri yang seorang itu saja, lebih baik ditubuhkan satu komiti di mana ada pelbagai ahli jawatan kuasa daripada pelbagai latar belakang yang boleh menapis dan juga mencalonkan nama itu kepada Perdana Menteri sebelum diangkat kepada Yang di-Pertuan Agong untuk dilantik oleh Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Terima kasih. Minta komen dari beliau.
Yeah, last question. Press the button, yeah.
Okay, Prof. My name is Nizam from JPM. My question is on the extent of parliamentary accountability, because it's influenced by two notions. One is parliamentary sovereignty, which is total accountability by ministerial to parliament, and second is ministerial responsibility, which the minister, when they become accountable, they have some based on strong and stable government, and also the standing order allows them to not to answer certain issues or issues. So my question is your comment on how to strike the balance between these two notions, parliamentary sovereignty and also ministerial responsibility. Thanks.
Okay, not more than 5 minutes.
I say the last one. Well, the notion of responsibility, accountability is political. It's not criminal. It's not something that, for example, you can go to court and compel the minister or whatever to do what you want. You see, so and you mentioned about the provision which allows ministers not to answer questions. Then that's it. So back to the issue or the question, the principle that the notion of accountability is political, and I guess perhaps you can use the media to pursue that ministers, right? Because we have yet to have that culture, and I think if you have a very alert and effective media, then we have got culture like in the UK where ministers who fumble or have their courts have their pens down, then the culture is you must resign. That is the meaning of political accountability. Now the question tadi Senator Ismail tadi soal memang itulah idealnya Parliamentary Service Act itu. Dan kita pun tak tahu kenapa dia dimansuhkan tahun 93 waktu debat krisis Raja-Raja Melayu dahulu kan. Jadi mungkin dia ambil kesempatan untuk abolish that parliamentary service. Yang saya fikir mengakibatkan beberapa orang kaki tangan yang saya rasa servis dia itu jadi disadvantages. Saya ingat itu boleh dibawa ke tribunal. Saya sebut pada Dato' Zamani tadi. Ya, boleh bawa pada tribunal sebab kita tak maulah kita punya servis itu didominasikan oleh PTD kan. Bukan saya marah PTD tak, tapi Parlimen kena ada servis dia sendiri. Bukan? Sebab dia kena autonomous, dia kena sovereign lah. And of course this perkhidmatan parlimen ini satu benda yang akan memperkasakan, yang akan assert that position. Dan saya harap kita boleh buat satu sesi khas untuk yang itu. Mengenai soal apa tadi, soal yang kedua, isu soal select committee kan. Ya, memang betul itulah satu platform, satu cara untuk NGO dan sebagainya untuk masuk ataupun untuk memberikan input, dan saya fikir di sinilah ahli-ahli parlimen yang dalam select committee, dalam caucus itu perlu melebarkan networking dia. Sebab saya rasa jangan duplikatkan tugas kementerian kat sini. Ya. Kita nak satu yang berbeza, yang jangan duplikat ataupun nak buat benda yang sama dengan kementerian. Kan? Saya harapkan caucus ataupun 6 komiti ini faham kerja dia. Jangan glamour saja tapi tak tahu apa kerja dia kan. Sangat kita kena pantau, dan saya fikir it's still a work in progress, so kita boleh improve lah. Yang last sekali soal yang wanita tadi bukan. Saya rasa sekarang itu tak perlu pun buat macam itu, sebab sama ada kita suka atau tidak, majoriti daripada pengundi adalah wanita. Bukan? Jadi isu apa semua adalah maknanya tanpa diadakan undang-undang ataupun sistem ataupun reservation pun, saya rasa isu wanita dan wakil wanita akan mendapat tempat. Ya. Dan parti yang tidak menerima itu saya rasa akan hanyut. Jadi saya fikir biarlah benda itu kita buat melalui cara politik ataupun cara praktis macam yang lain-lain lah. Bukan semua nak kena buat undang-undang. Sebab tu saya baru ni bila dipanggil oleh jawatan khas majlis kajian saya sebut, kita kena kurangkan undang-undang ni kalau boleh lah. Don't think that every problem, every issue must be dealt with by law. Ini satu perkara yang pemikiran lama lah. Maknanya kita kena buat satu benda yang baru. Sebab tu sama ada komiti untuk melantik hakim dan sebagainya, kita boleh buat di luar undang-undang, di luar perlembagaan. Tetapi dia memperkasa dan memperincikan perlembagaan. Itu yang penting. Dan saya rasa itu lebih baik sebab dia lebih murah, dia lebih informal dan dia lebih fleksibel. Ya. Tetapi it can cover or rather it can accomplish the objectives. Itu yang penting. Terima kasih.
Doktor tak komen mekanisme Dewan Negara tadi.
Okay.
Selection. The committee selection.
Bila kita sebut Perdana Menteri, bukan makna Perdana Menteri itu seorang. Terutama kalau Perdana Menteri itu kerusi dia sikit kan, dia kena sedar diri dia lah. Dia kena konsult orang lah kan. Betul. I'm not joking. I'm referring a certain particular person. But what I'm saying is that the Prime Minister's office is an office, not a person. So orang yang jadi PM kena sedar dia. It's not a person, you know. It's an office. It's an institution. Yeah, and he or she must make sure that the functioning represent the majority, bukan dia. You know. So to me it's okay lah. I mean, it is good. You can use that channel to make sure that the ideals are being accomplished.
Terima kasih Yang Berhormat Profesor Dr. Aziz Bahri atas presentation dan juga atas sesi perkongsian soal jawab sekali. Tuan-tuan dan puan, minta maaf kerana mengambil masa 5 minit lebih daripada yang telah diperuntukkan. Saya kembali kepada pengacara majlis. Mohon maaf. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Majlis mengucapkan jutaan terima kasih kepada Yang Berhormat Dr. Abdul Aziz Bahri serta Yang Berhormat Datuk Ahmad Kasim bagi perkongsian yang amat menarik pada pagi ini. Thank you Honorable Dr. Abdul Aziz Bahri and Honorable Datuk Ahmad Kasim for a very informative discussion. Majlis ingin menjemput yang berbahagia Profesor Datuk Dr. Rizwan Uthman untuk menyampaikan cenderamata kepada pembentang dan moderator sesi 1. Dipersilakan. I would like to invite Professor Datuk Dr. Rizwan Uthman to give a token of appreciation to both speaker and moderator of the session. Terima kasih, Datuk. Selesai sudah sesi pertama kita untuk pagi ini. Majlis akan diteruskan lagi dengan sesi kedua yang bertajuk Peranan Parlimen demi mencapai matlamat pembangunan lestari. Pembentangan untuk sesi ini akan dilakukan oleh Mr. Stefan Priesner, Wakil Residen UNDP di Malaysia, dan moderator pula ialah Encik Wan Zainuddin bin Ali Aspa. The second session for today is entitled The Role of Parliaments Around the World in Contributing to Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The session will be moderated by Mr. Wan Zainuddin Ali Aspa, and the speaker is Mr. Stefan Priesner, UNDP Resident Representative in Malaysia. I would now like to invite both the speaker and the moderator to begin the session. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Madam MC. First of all, I would like to apologize to all because wearing like this to this parliament. I'm always here, but today is the day that I forget my blazer. So sorry for that. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, Dato', Professor, ladies and gentlemen. So now I would like to continue our seminar with the next session that will be presented by our speaker, Mr. Stefan Priesner, entitled The Role of Parliament in Achieving the Sustainability Development Goals. So ladies and gentlemen, before I start, I would like to share a little bit and short background about our speaker. He has extensive experience in international development and management issues and has been working with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, since 1996. He has provided policy advice to governments and overseen the formulation and delivery of a range of complex, multidisciplinary development programs in a close partnership with government, bilateral, multilateral, and other partners in various countries in the Asia-Pacific and Eastern Europe. And that is the little bit background of what the speakers. And without any further ado, I would like to invite our guests, our speakers today, Mr. Stefan Priesner, the UN Resident Coordinator in Malaysia, that will be present the role of parliaments in achieving SDGs. Please be welcome.
Assalamualaikum. Selamat pagi, and a very warm good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure and honor to address you today in this wonderful hall here. And I'd like to especially greet YB Dato Muhammad Arif, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Parliament of Malaysia, and the organizer, Professor Dato Dr. Muhammad Redzuan Othman, Deputy Chairman of the Institute Darul Ezan. Now I have a huge list of protocol to observe. So if I may, I will just say I'm really honored to address all of you MPs, speakers of state assemblies, distinguished guests from Australia and elsewhere, and distinguished participants. Protocol herewith observed. Thank you. I was asked to present on, I think, a very timely subject, namely the role of parliaments around the world in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it very nicely fits into the first session, because the first session was about people-centered parliaments. And I believe that the Sustainable Development Goals, as I will argue, is the ultimate people-centered global development agenda. So it really kind of, I think, dovetails very nicely with the first session. I have prepared a PowerPoint to help me kind of convey, I think, a few interesting ideas, but maybe also complex ideas. And I will, if this works, seems to be far away from here. Where's the computer? Is it on? No, it's on. Okay. I've structured my my talk into 4 different themes. First of all, obviously, because I'm a representative of a global organization, I would like to outline what the Sustainable Development Goals are. I'm not sure what the knowledge is around in the hall here, but before explaining what the role of Parliament is, I think it's important to explain very briefly what the SDGs, that's the short form for Sustainable Development Goals, are. And I'm using 2 examples from my own experience, which I think is more interesting than going now through hundreds of graphs. And they are not from Malaysia. They're from other countries, but I think they give a very good insight of the principles of the Sustainable Development Goals. Then I will have a small section on looking at some of these core principles in the context of Malaysia. Now, the point is not to give an overall development presentation here, but I think it's important to argue why the agenda is extremely important for Malaysia as well, although Malaysia is a very developed country in comparison to other countries in the region in many ways. And then I come, I think, having outlined this framework, I come hopefully to some interesting ideas of why it's important that the government, the Parliament engages in this agenda and how it can engage in this agenda, ending with a few broad recommendations that hopefully give specific insights. So my first picture is a picture from Bangladesh. I was posted in Bangladesh 10 years ago, and it shows a typical slum. At that time in Bangladesh, I believe it's now much, much smaller, the number of slums. But I wanted to show this because this is also the 21st century. One of the ideas of the Sustainable Development Goals is to eradicate poverty globally. And we have still about 700 million ultra-poor around the world. And poverty, and this is my second point, is not an income problem. It's a problem of a multi-sectoral problem of access to health, access to education, access to water sanitation, and so on. So if you look at the statistics here, it's an unfinished poverty agenda. We have 700 million people still living in poverty, about 75% of them in rural areas, and it's not the same in all countries. Every country is very, very specific. So I think because there was an earlier kind of comment about the imposition of international frameworks. International frameworks are always only frameworks. One always has to localize them in the specific national context. Every country is different, and there is no wholesale solutions that you can take from one country to the next. Malaysia is not here, because Malaysia in global statistics more or less has eradicated absolute poverty. But as I will show in the Malaysia section, it's not as easy as that. My second slide is from my recent appointment before I came to Malaysia in Uzbekistan. That's in Central Asia. And this is a picture of a place called the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was once the 3rd biggest sweetwater lake in the world. It was about 65,000 square kilometers large. It's about half of the size of peninsular Malaysia. And this is the former shores of the Aral Sea. You stand there, you see a couple of ships lying in the sand, and it is from that point about 160 kilometers until the sea today begins. The small picture on the left side shows in 1970 how big the sea was, and in today how big the sea is. About only 1/15 of the former size. There is no life anymore in the Aral Sea. So it was once feeding fish to the whole Soviet Union, and it's one of the biggest environmental disasters. I'm not showing this because it's relevant for Malaysia, but I think it's a very powerful example of how economic development and environment are connected. The reason why this is the case is because there has been massive irrigation schemes on the river watershed that kind of feeds the Aral Sea, and there was no water anymore coming to the Aral Sea. This slide translates what I tried to illustrate in a picture in graphs. There is a circle, which is the planet Earth. And then there are different segments which outline the environmental degradation of our planet. So there are different triangles. Some of the triangles are inside the Earth. That means the Earth can still recover from these environmental degradations. But there are some triangles, such as climate change, which means that the world cannot recover anymore without major intervention, coordinated global intervention. There is a gigantic dark red triangle around 5 o'clock, and that is biodiversity degradation. Biodiversity degradation happens currently about 1,000 times as fast as the natural degradation without human influence. That's how important the environment agenda is globally today. We have right now, we have a global meeting in Poland. You have seen the news. It's about climate change, but similar meetings go on the other, in the other areas of environmental degradation. So this is the business case of the Sustainable Development Goals. These are not problems that can be solved only by member states. These are problems that have to have worldwide coordination. One good example of coordination is the ozone hole. The ozone hole was a huge issue in the 1980s, and it's today more or less under control, but it's only under control because all countries in the world have collaborated. These Sustainable Development Goals come up with a very comprehensive development framework based on the largest consultative process ever conducted in the history of mankind. About 8 million people were involved, all 193 UN member states, and they have agreed on one framework, has been signed by all 193 member states. Consists of 17 goals and no less than 169 targets. This sounds a lot, but as I will argue, it's actually very manageable. This is the depiction of the Sustainable Development Goals. If I may move a little bit, because I need to be closer. If I may move a little bit closer to one of the graphs here. These goals recognize that economic growth is the center of development. Goal 8 is called decent work and economic growth. Industry, industrial development, and urban development. But this core of economic development is flanked with a number of goals that have to do with social inclusion, to bring vulnerable elements of society up and into the development mainstream. Poverty, hunger, this is maybe not important for Malaysia, but it's a globally important goal. Health, education, gender equality, water and sanitation. And then down here, there is another flank, which is the environmental goals. And these environmental goals have to do with climate change, with biodiversity degradation, both below water and on land. And that all of this is founded on a basis. And this basis is good governance and institutional reform. So this is the philosophy in 3 minutes of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the miracle is that all 193 member states have agreed on this. So what you are seeing is that there are 10,000s of actors today, 100,000s of actors, not only 193 member states, but also private sector, also local governments, also NGOs, working to do their share to achieve these goals. What this will mean is that over time, the economic paradigm, I believe, will shift to incorporate both social inclusion as well as environmental sustainability. So, and I have to say that Malaysia is a forerunner in taking on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have excellent collaboration as the United Nations systems with the government, at least the federal government. We would like to collaborate more with state governments, but at this point in time, it's a matter also of our own capacity to support. but we have excellent collaboration in Malaysia, and we have good achievements. One issue that I want to mention is that this framework, I said there are 169 targets underneath. And the good thing about these targets is that they are all measurable. They're all very precise, and you can track basically progress, or if there's no progress, if you're falling behind, you have a good mapping where you can adjust your policy framework towards perhaps accelerating progress towards certain goals. I want to quote my former boss, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who said the reason why we have agreed on this framework is because there's no plan B, because we don't have a planet B. So there are three principles in this framework which makes it very, very ambitious. And that is, number one, the principle of leaving no one behind. That means that economic development is not economic development unless it brings in vulnerable groups, unless it has strong social protection systems, unless it reduces poverty. Number two, it is founded on the basis of good governance and rights. And number three, the issue of environmental sustainability, as I already pointed out. No use to develop economically rapidly and leave the environment out, because then you don't do justice basically to this global framework. It is really about a balanced development between economy, social and environment. So to put it very simple, no goal is met unless it is met by everyone. That's the vision, and we know that it's difficult to achieve, but some countries are more successful than others, and I think Malaysia can be proud because it's in many ways an example of development for us. There was before the SDGs something that was called the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and Malaysia did well, especially in poverty reduction and other social issues. But the Sustainable Development Goals are much more ambitious. They are not so much concerned about macro indicators. Of course, macro indicators, 0.4% poverty rate in Malaysia, are important. But what is also important is to go down and see whether there is differences in the different states, if there's differences in the different population groups that we try to target. So I've put together a simple slide on issues of leaving no one behind. UNDP stands for leaving no one behind in Malaysia. So poverty, as I said, 0.4%. However, there are 30.3% orang asli who are under the poverty line, 20.2% indigenous population in Sabah, and also in Sarawak, significantly more than the average. There are other groups who are similarly basically vulnerable and who are not, where we cannot say it's a done deal. We have done it. Malaysia has succeeded. Similarly, gender, the issue of gender, there is at this point a gender pay gap, and for all of these, Malaysia has very good data. It's very important to, of course, have good data, because then you can target policies very, very precisely. Education and health is another example. We have issues of access to health for refugees, for example, or for undocumented population. We have also health issues to be dealt with. We have a big governance and rights agenda, and I think the new government is very famous beyond the borders of Malaysia to take on the issue of democratization and institutional reform in a very robust manner. So these goals, I think, Malaysia can show, hopefully in a few years, many other countries how it is supposed to be done. And then there is issues of sustainability, of environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability has to do how you plan your energy rollout, how you reach the last that haven't been reached yet with energy. Is it renewable energy that is not polluting, or is it traditional energy basically that is carbon intensive? We have climate change as a big issue, global issue, and as I said, to my mind, the most serious issue in terms of environment in the medium term or in the short term for Malaysia is biodiversity degradation. Malaysia is one of the last biodiversity hotspots in the world because of your rainforest. In a little square of 100 by 100 meters in Sarawak, that's the most biodiverse area. Little square, 100 by 100 meters, maybe a little bit bigger than this room here. It's 3 times as big as this room. You have more biodiversity than in the whole continent that I'm from. I'm from Europe. I have to travel 3,000 kilometers from the south of Greece to the north of Norway, and in Malaysia I have to only go 100 meters and I have the same number of plant species and animal species available. That's why this is such a precious global asset that is there, this rainforest. And that's why it's really worth basically having extra policies to take into account, these important goals. So I have already said that Malaysia has done well to localize the SDGs into national development plans. And I'm just here referring to the 11th Malaysia plan that has recently gone under a review because of the change of government. There was a review to adjust the 11th five-year plan to the manifesto of the government. And so at the macro level, it's quite nicely aligned. Of course, there are always issues. The question is how it's implemented. There is many ways between the macro planning and then of course the implementation. So one of the things that I will propose for the government is some kind of monitoring system to see how the SDGs are implemented by government. So why are parliaments so crucial for SDG attainment? First of all, parliaments are part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 16 is the goal of Parliament. It's called Peace and Good Governance for Inclusive Development. And there is one target which is called Responsive, Inclusive, Participatory and Representative Decision-Making Systems. So that's democratic systems. And so basically the SDG framework prompts governments to focus, among many other things, on parliamentary development and on democratic reforms. But Parliament, we believe, from the United Nations, has a huge role to help implement and take forward all the other goals. Why? I will say in a moment. First of all, the SDGs are so ambitious that they have to be taken forward by a multi-stakeholder endeavor. Government has to take the implementation lead. But we need to mobilize the whole democratic system to really make it work. And we were talking in the session before about the different checks and balances. And of course the checks and balances are there to really make government also implement these SDGs. So Parliament has a role in oversight. It has a role in its legislative drafting activities to take into account the SDGs. And it has a role in its representational role with regard to its constituency to take forward the Sustainable Development Goals. Parliamentarians are the people's champions. They are the people's representatives, of course, and therefore, who is better equipped to take forward a deeply people-centered agenda? You care about your people, and as we have heard, you have to care about the people, because otherwise there may be a different parliamentarian after the next election. So the accountability is very powerful. And you do also have a constitutional responsibility, obviously, to monitor the implementation of what government does, including Sustainable Development Goals. So I believe that there's an essential role of national parliaments through their enactment of legislation, adoption of budgets, and their role in ensuring accountability for the effective implementation of the commitments, the global commitments, which, as I said, have been translated into every member state. So what can you actually do? I would like to split it into the 3 functions of Parliament: legislative, representative, and oversight function. And I've prepared 2 slides for each. One for legislative, just to explain what it's about. It's about either reviewing legislation that comes to Parliament, whether it is basically really a legislation that is in line with the spirit of the SDGs. Is it, does it take into account social inclusion? Does it take into account environmental sustainability? Or to prioritize, in general, legislation that provides an enabling environment for the SDGs. So it's about aligning the legal framework as one of the major tools of enabling any policy to happen with the spirit of the SDGs. I want to give a few very concrete examples how this has been done. And you will see that these examples come partly from developed countries, from the most developed countries in the world, and partly from developing countries. The Sustainable Development Goals make every country in the world, in a sense, to a developing country. Even, you know, Germany, even Iceland cannot say that they have solved the issue of environmental sustainability. So they all basically are included in this framework. That's the beauty of the SDGs. It's really a common global agenda where countries can learn from each other. Obviously, they cannot, again, you know, take blueprints. They have to adapt to their own situation, but they can definitely kind of take cue. So Iceland, for example, has implemented a law to ensure equal pay for women, legally required. That is an important commitment of the Sustainable Development Goals 5, which is gender equality. Germany, it was too fast. Germany has decreed that the federal budget and financial policies need to be in line with the SDGs. And New Zealand has completely revamped this, its Education Act that was dating back from 1989 towards focusing on quality of education, which is a key in the Sustainable Development Goals. Second, the representative function of the Parliament. The representative function means that you mobilize the outreach that you have to your constituents and to your communities to identify community needs and gaps that to directly contribute to the SDGs. In many countries, planning is done in a very abstract way. And I think there is hardly anybody better equipped than parliamentarians to inform these national plans by actual feedback from the ground. You know the issues that are important in your constituencies, so you can connect the micro problems with the national planning. And that can help you then in the review of national plans, for example, or in the review of national budgets. Examples of this. South Korea has institutionalized public SDG forums where parliamentarians interact with the public to get feedback. What are the real issues on the ground to strengthen basically feedback to the government. Or Ghana, that has simple tool, web portal. It can be easily, I think, done probably in a very, very good way here in Malaysia, and maybe you have it already, a web portal where citizens simply can provide their feedback, and out of that, analytical issues, analytical studies are done to find out what really the concerns of the public is. I think one of the former speakers, maybe it was actually Honourable Speaker himself, talked about an app, for example, a parliamentary app, and this could be a very nice feature to provide feedback to the Parliament. And then we have the third function, and that's the oversight function of the Parliament. The oversight function, that brings with it that it makes sense that Parliament basically monitors the implementation of national plans, obviously, which you already do, but in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's one thing to say that the national plan contributes to the SDGs, and a whole another one if it really makes progress. Fiji, for example, has institutionalized an annual process where each parliamentary standing committee reviews the government policy as it relates to the SDGs and to the targets within the different mandates of the different standing committees. In France, the Parliament has given a mission to the different ministries to analyze the sector policies in line with the SDGs, and the ministries had to report back to the Parliament on how aligned the policies actually are. So committee oversight of SDG implementation would be, I think, a logical part of the terms of reference of each of the committees. Finally, budgetary oversight. Also, of course, a very important tool with oversight, but budgetary oversight specifically. In Norway, you do have the normal kind of, you have each line ministry is responsible for an SDG. They are doing their sector plans, then it's compiled by the Ministry of Finance, put into a relatively easily understandable framework so that Parliament can scrutinize the budget with regard to its compliance with SDGs. And in Argentina, the Parliament has been involved in the implementation of the SDG agenda through aligning the legislation in a very kind of systematic manner. My final slide is called national ownership. National ownership in some countries, including the UK, but also Indonesia, there are committees to support the SDGs, which are linking different institutions such as government, but also parliamentarians are included. So these are multi-stakeholder committees, because with the idea that parliamentarians can add significant value to the knowledge of the government to take certain policies forward. Now my last issue is on, my last segment is on recommendations, and I just want to make the point that there is multiple areas where the government of Malaysia already collaborates with the United Nations system. We have together drafted a SDG roadmap, which was almost ready, but then the elections came, and the manifesto changed, of course, a little bit the course of action. So now the SDG roadmap has to be reviewed with regard to the manifesto priorities. We are supporting the statistical office of Malaysia with a SDG database. So you have, as I said, 169 targets, and then there are indicators, 200 plus indicators. And for each of these indicators, there will be a baseline, what the progress, that to enable us to measure progress from year to year, or in a couple of years' time. So an extremely important exercise. And as I said, the power of data in the 21st century is very, very impressive. You can not only have, you don't need to only have national data, but you have data based on state level, district level, disaggregated into groups, and that enables you much more targeted way to allocate resources to certain problems. And there are many other areas. We are engaging with the private sector, we are engaging with the NGO communities, we are helping the government to strengthen the monitoring and evaluation system. So this is a presentation by itself. But I will come now as a final point to the recommendations. And I mean, these are very broad recommendations, but they can easily be taken forward. First of all, I think it's important to be prepared for the SDGs, and the government is already very much prepared. But the Parliament can build its understanding of SDGs through seminars such as this one. And again, I'm really honored and happy to speak here. It can tailor the SDGs and the national plans according to what I said, inputs from the grassroots. There is still two years' time for the next strategic plan of Malaysia, so there is a huge role that the government can play until this plan comes on board in 2020. And of course, it can mainstream the SDGs into the parliamentary mechanisms. For all of this, there are tools that we are happy to share, that the government can, or the parliament can do a self-assessment of what can be done specifically to take it forward. We can also support this self-assessment. So 4 ways for the parliament to ensure SDG implementation. Step 1, seek inputs from the grassroots. That is your representative function. Number 2, link it to legislation. Ensure that legislation is supportive of the SDG framework. Number 3, review the annual state budget as the major allocation mechanism. And finally, monitor government program delivery to make your oversight function meaningful in the sense of SDGs. I think it's a very important stage to contribute. This whole seminar is about parliamentary reform, and I think I would recommend that the SDG element would be part of this reform. It could link to strengthening of the Secretariat through improved research capacities. It could link to lawmaking, that the Bills Committee, for example, can ensure that laws are taking into account the SDGs. It can very importantly link to the thematic select committees. I understand that there have been just 6 committees established, but in the future it would be, of course, also important to have, I think, a committee on environmental sustainability, if possible, and maybe even in some countries you have LNOB committees, leaving no one behind committees, that always kind of checks that there is some inclusiveness element in the considerations of the government. And finally, platforms to engage the public to strengthen the representational role. How the UN can help? We can help in all of this. We are happy to help in all of this. Institutional strengthening, training on SDGs, and of course, direct provision of expertise if it is required. We look forward to taking this agenda forward with you to help Malaysia become a real, I would say, champion of the SDGs. To a certain extent, they are already champions, but other countries are catching up very quickly, and there is a little bit of a race globally who does best in SDG implementation. Thank you very much for contributing to the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefan, for the informative presentation just now. So to make the floor interesting, I open up the floor with questions. We will collect 3 first questions. Then we'll continue to the 3 questions after that, after Mr. Stefan responds. Okay, there. 1, 2. Okay, and 3. Okay, start from here. One from
presented, leaving no one behind. Very excited because I'm always concerned with the marginalized, the poor, the orphans and the widows because of my own background. I came from a very hard background before, so I'm always mindful of this. So my question is, leaving no one behind. So I like to put this question, how have we been doing so far? As you have been a United Nations representative in Malaysia. So how, so far, what's the challenges and what are the things that we need to do? Because I'm looking at the local scenario where I come from, in Jasin, Malacca. So I'm concerned that after your talk, I'm thinking about how to target them, because you have 169 targets that you can see really how you're progressing. Sometimes we have a lot of plans, but all very vague. So we like to learn from your experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, Mr. Stefan. This question, I need your advice and point of view for the idea of social economic acceleration of Bumiputra privilege in context of Malaysia and Article 153 of Constitution of Malaysia from standpoint of SDG goal number 10 and number 16.
Thank you. Last question. Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Stefan. Very good afternoon. Okay, my name is Parthiban. I'm representing an NGO. Okay, when we talk about sustainability, like we are often have a perception, especially in the developing countries, that the developed countries are imposing on us. So, like, what is the UNDP's role in overcoming this perception, and like how it is successful in Malaysia thus far? Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan.
Thank you for these questions. I think very interesting, all three very interesting questions. I hope to do justice to them. Deputy Speaker of Malacca, I don't know by heart the poverty rate of Malacca, I have to admit, but I think how this can be done is that we collaborate also with states. We collaborate with Perak, for example, with Sabah on different issues, and we are agreeing with the government. We don't do anything, and this is part of the answer to our colleague over there. UN doesn't do anything by themselves. We are supporting national actors because, of course, the whole idea is national leadership. So we can support, for example, the government of Malacca with certain analytical exercises to look at either disadvantaged locations, which you feel are kind of structurally disadvantaged for certain reasons. One of our agencies has recently done, for example, a report on the urban poor, and the urban poor in Kuala Lumpur, actually, and has found out that in certain pockets of Kuala Lumpur, and not all kind of, but also in Selangor, in Petaling Jaya, and so on, there is actually very significant urban poverty. So one is locations, or the other ones is certain groups. I mean, in some of the bigger states, it's very often the indigenous that, for remoteness reasons and other reasons, basically are significantly worse off. So you can decide on different angles how to target either groups or locations. It always starts obviously with an analytical exercise. You look at data, and then you usually enhance this with what is called focus groups. You know, talk to the people in very extensive interviews to find out what the root causes of this poverty is, and then very, very precise strategies can be adopted. And the idea, the role of the United Nations would be to help you do this analytical exercise. We would probably do this with local NGOs together, because they have a lot more knowledge than us on the local specificities, and then provide a report with recommendations how to take this forward. Number two, the development of the Bumiputra in the context of SDG and SDGs 10 and 16. Is that
10 and 16. 10 and 16.
10 and 16.
Yeah.
10 is just, I don't think everybody,
Yeah.
So 10 is reducing inequality, and 16 is governance and peace. Yeah. The SDGs, as well as the human rights framework, recognize the necessity for affirmative action where necessary. So, for example, what the Deputy Speaker of Malacca asked now, to do an analytical exercise for a certain group, to perhaps afterwards kind of target these groups, is an affirmative action exercise. So this is very much in line with the thinking of the human rights framework, by the way, also ICERT, and also the issue of development and SDGs. You always have to also kind of take into account that development and human rights for the United Nations are two sides of the same coin. We will not engage in any development if it is contradictory, basically, to a human rights framework, because otherwise we would undermine our own principles that we were basically, built upon. We are not an independent, we are an independent agency, but we have been created by all the member states. And the member states gave us a certain mandate, and we have to follow this mandate. And this partly also then answers, I think, our colleague's question. We are not a state, of course, that has bilateral relations at the same level. We are mandated by the community of independent countries in the world. And therefore, we are carrying out the mandate, and the SDGs, as I said, is the biggest mandate until the year 2030 that has been given not to the United Nations to take forward, but to the whole world to take forward, because the United Nations, in terms of resources, is a tiny, tiny element that we can contribute. It's more the knowledge, it's more the analytical framework that we can take forward. But in the end, it has to be carried by national planning, by national resource management. Thank you.
Okay, the next, I think we have about 8 minutes. So 2 questions. Yes, there. And one more. One more here. Oh, there. Okay. Here first.
Thank you very much. I'm Ong from Business Ethics Institute of Malaysia. Well, at Business Ethics Institute of Malaysia, we always link ethics to successful implementation of sustainable goals. So my question here is, in terms of connecting the dots, the Parliament can registrate whatever that is necessary, form committees and all that. But very often the enforcement is what is a key, yeah, to ensure the results are being seen on the ground. So my question to you is, in what way, the chart is too far away from here, I can't see. So within your framework, in what way are you introducing ethics into this particular effort, so that, number one, the budgets, you talk about budgets, are being used appropriately. And number two, the culture of the society in supporting SDG is not contradictory to the need of the Parliament to focus on key issues like raising the economic well-being of the B40. Thank you. My last point is economic development of the B40 is not in contradiction to the SDG goals.
Thank you. My name is Yusmadi. I'm the backdoor MP. Just to quote Dr. Jenison, my question is, for me, no, so Professor, I'm joking. Just to go further to the topics. For me, I find the topic is very, very interesting. In fact, I find one of a very different for this forum, how to see Parliament as to play a role when it comes to development. For me, that's for me, from my point of view, is strategic, because I've seen the potential. Where I come from, Mr. Stefan, is this: while we are talking about SDG, typically and normally it comes at a very high level of helicopter level. Normally it works at the levels of G2G, government to government. But what I would like to ask for your response is this: parliamentarians have many advantages. Among others, they can inspire at a very lower level of the community. Can you imagine if the role of parliamentarian can be empowered at the very bottom-up level? Can you imagine, take for example, when I was MP of Balik Pulau, if Balik Pulau can be a corridor that embrace SDG? Can you imagine? But currently, the kind of diplomacy that you are having doesn't allow that to happen. I can say so because I try to talk to ADB, because I'm exposed to this developmental, because it doesn't operate in that manner. Because it's very Putrajaya, UN, and then only then it goes to Jasin. So can we, because I take I like your approach about the technological introduction by our speaker about the apps. And in fact, now people are having, like in Sarawak, the young boy doing monitoring under open promises. You know, how we politicians promise so much, but nobody monitor. So can you imagine, I need your response, do you have that strategy to really empower the parliamentarian on the ground so that they can create their own constituency to embrace all these beautiful targets? And my last point is that, I don't know, maybe you have to do monitoring, how many times the word SDG, or last time was MDG, been uttered in our handset before we start, you know, to know that whether the topics really been discussed in Parliament. Because so far as far as I remember, 2008, 2018 was there? Not many. Thank you.
One more question, Mr. Stefan. Asked online, the question is like this. While most of the lawmakers are using top-down approach, how to ensure bottom-up approach being implemented by Parliament to achieve the localizing SDGs? Please welcome.
Thank you. Very good second set of questions as well. First one, enforcement. This is very much a macro framework that obviously basically has to be localized at different levels. The highest one is the national level, and I think that one is okay. There is KPIs, key performance indicators, there is baselines, but I don't think it has yet had the chance to trickle down to state level and even less so to municipal level. And also these levels are very important. I'll give you an example. I think many of you know that the current United States government is not supportive of climate change targets. But nevertheless, the US is, I think, surpassing and exceeding climate change targets because the states and the different businesses are doing so much on climate change. And because I think you come from the business sector, no? I would also like to say that that business is incredibly important because you are not only the employer of people under decent work conditions, you are also the innovator and you are the investor in SDGs. So I have had lots of SDG talks with different chambers and I've seen, as you rightly point out, that there is a very strong inclusiveness and sustainability ethics in many businesses here in Malaysia. We estimate that in terms of the overall financing of SDGs, around 40% will have to come from the private sector. So you can have about 50% from domestic public resources, 40% from private sector, and then 10% through international direct investment and international aid. That is the situation in a country like Malaysia, which is an upper middle income country where aid doesn't play such a big role. So the money is there, it's just basically the ideas how to make it happen. And that brings me to the core of your question. Accountability for implementation. I think there are different tools to make it happen. One is measurement. You have a chance to basically, as I said, measure the contribution of different entities towards the SDGs. For businesses, this would be most probably a self-imposed framework, that you basically look which SDGs can you contribute, and you come up with action plans to contribute to certain SDGs, and then you monitor progress. There is many tools on the net already internationally, because the big businesses in the world have all taken on, or most taken on, the Sustainable Development Goals. The other one is ethics, obviously, both business ethics. There is what is called the Global Compact and the 10 Principles of Global Compact, which very specifically kind of tell businesses what to do within this framework. And there is public sector accountability, obviously, also to achieve the goals. The question, parliamentary, the role of parliamentarians rather than the institution, and how the UN can support this. It's true that we are usually collaborating with institutions and not with individuals, but if it is in many parliamentary programs, parliamentary support programs, it's divided into 3 segments. One, to strengthen the Secretariat as the permanent kind of cell to resource a parliament. Secondly, to strengthen the parliament as an institution. And thirdly, to strengthen some parliamentarians that are interested to take activities as you have just proposed forward. So, for example, a public consultation or a public in a certain constituency, if it is well organized, is something that potentially can be supported. And the internet question was on bottom-up approach to help localize the SDGs. So usually I mean, there is in many layers of governance, there is kind of a democratic element, a bottom-up element. And also in local government, of course, you have certainly in Malaysia, you have the state level where there is a state national assembly. So by mobilizing the different parliamentarians or people's representatives to kind of systematically report back what the concerns are of the constituents, you can crystallize or catalyze a process where you have bottom-up feedback into, let's say, top-down planning, because it is true that in many states top-down planning is the primary modality. So it is important that it's not only a reliance on single parliamentarians that are interested in that, but perhaps also really encourage parliamentarians to do that as part of their job, to come back with feedback and to aggregate this in terms of conclusion, because very often we are discussing plans at very, very high level. So this is, I think, the answers that I have to offer. I don't know, do we have time for a third round? Maybe not, I don't know. Organizers?
Okay, the organizer give us 5 minutes. So 1 or 2 questions. Okay, here, 1. Okay, just 1. Okay, I'll give you. Okay, here first.
Hello, Mr. Stefan. My name is Musana from local research institute. Just quoting Amartya Sen that saying that poverty as capability deprivation, which has been the philosophy of the backbone of the UNDP's work and report on introducing the multidimensional poverty approach, which I'm not sure has been taken in the Malaysia's context or not, but from what I've read and listened from the review of 11th Malaysia Plan, it's somehow going to be incorporated into how Malaysia perceives poverty. So from the past experience from, for example, Selangor State Assembly, where they have a special select committee on poverty elimination, we saw that there are multiple fragmented and piecemeal solutions for poverty eradication, but it's working on like the policy level to look into the poverty issues, which maybe Parliament can leverage on this issue to appoint a select committee on poverty elimination or eradication. But from your presentation just now, I heard about that special select committee on specifically looking into the SDGs. I'm not sure the mechanism of this type of special select committee specifically looking into the SDGs compared to like how do we incorporate the SDG mindset into the whole parliamentarian, the legislator, to like have a broader picture, broader objective of SDGs into the whole issues that being discussed or deliberated in the parliament. So that's the 2 options that I'm looking for some response. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, Denison again. You know, I found your set of slides extremely good and helpful, and I think it not only was colorful, but very, very descriptive and comprehensive. I think this question you have made references already, but I wanted more comments towards strengthening, localizing SDGs. I think one that has already emerged from the second person who raised the question, the speaker just now did say that there's going to be a parliamentary select or caucus on environment. You made the reference to environmental sustainability and whether SDGs could be a framework there in that focus, because it is cross-cutting as opposed to other areas of focus. But I think I'm more thinking from 1 or 2 other speakers, like from Jasin just now as well. how can we engage members of parliament more to use SDG as a framework for them to assess development at their parliamentary level? Then they would actually be one of the best grassroots people who are supposedly weekly going to their kawasan, and that they would see development, not just action on poverty, but also environment, human rights, and they become the key catalyst. Are there examples from other countries? Are there materials so that what we just heard just now was that if Parliament has not uttered the word SDG in 2018, this is 4 years after SDGs have been introduced, then possibly 2019 onwards, how can we get MPs or increase their level of awareness to use it as a tool to assess the budget, to assess delivery to their particular constituencies in a more effective and efficient way? Thank you.
Thank you. One last online question, Mr. Stefan. I think it's related to the previous question. How can SDG agenda bring together the right stakeholders at the right time in the right place? Welcome.
The last one is a tough one. No, but let me take them on one by one. The first question was Amartya Sen, multidimensional poverty. I think the SDGs are taking this forward. I mean, as you rightly point out, Amartya Sen was really the person that has influenced our poverty thinking probably most today, or among those. From the 1990s on, we did not think anymore in terms of poverty only as income, but as poverty as being multidimensional. And I mentioned this when I showed the slide of the slum in Bangladesh, that I said, you know, poverty is not, the income is very often only the result of deprivation in terms of education, lack of access to education, lack of access to health services, lack of water to sanitation. So it really has to be seen as multi-dimensional deprivation. And it's true that the MTR, the midterm review of the 11th five-year plan, incorporates this. I think we need to dig deeper. The UN system proposed to go towards a more robust concept of multidimensional poverty, because it's very much in line with the SDGs. You know, if you target SDG 1, it will also have an impact on 2 to 5. You talked about the piecemeal approach in Selangor. I think again it is very difficult, obviously a very, very difficult issue. I can imagine that sometimes it's only band-aiding different issues that come up. So it would have to be, I think the multidimensional poverty index is an extremely good analytical tool to come up with a mix of inclusive economic growth strategies and social protection strategies. That's basically, in a very simplified way, how we see poverty reduction in a systematic way. On the one hand, having growth strategies that are related to vulnerable groups, and then also having safety nets that include these vulnerable groups. Second question was Dr. Dennison's question on the committees. I am grateful for this question, because I think there's a difference between an environmental select committee and a sustainable development, a sustainable environment or environmental sustainability committee. The difference is that as per the SDGs, the environment would have to be linked towards you know, certain vulnerable group issues. It doesn't make sense to look into environment only from a biodiversity issue if you have indigenous peoples living in those forests. You have to look at it in an integrated way, that there are certain people you know, dependent on this, on certain you know, environmental resources and so on. So I think that's the power of the SDGs, that they connect the people's issues with the planet issues, the issue of deprivation and poverty with environmental dimension. You also talked about how to kind of, in a sense, comprehensively introduce the SDGs into parliamentary work. I mean, can only offer, because this goes beyond this particular seminar, but I can only offer that we can easily put a support kind of package in place. There are very, I think, strong toolkits available that would lead the parliamentarians and the parliament through a self-thinking exercise of how this can be basically done, both in terms of training as well as in terms of reflection in the select committees and in different institutional components or aspects of the parliament. And finally, there was a quite broad question. How do we get? Can you repeat the question? How can the SDG agenda bring together the right stakeholders at the right time in the right place? There's too many, I think, variables to this question to have one answer to that. I think it depends very much on the specific issue within the SDG framework. But for everything the United Nations does, for any analysis, we would make sure that there is a multi-stakeholder analysis. So I don't know if we have we talked about urban poverty. Obviously, we would talk both to the so-called duty bearers, the municipal administration that is supposed to provide support to these poor people, as well as to the poor themselves, as well as to potential private sector actors that could help to remedy the situation. So this is a question of process design, and I can propose. I have with me a few tools about Parliament and SDGs, and I'd be happy to share it with the Secretariat and others that this can be taken forward, and the UN will always stand ready to make this to help you make this more concrete. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are done, and I would like to thanks to Mr. Stefan and all of the questions given just now. Sorry for any inconvenience, and thank you very much. Back to the Madam's MC.
Thank you, Mr. Stefan Priesner and Mr. Wan Zainuddin Ali Aspa for the enlightening session. Now, I would like to invite His Excellency Datuk Muhammad Arif Mat Yusof to give a token of appreciation to both the speaker and moderator of the session. Maka selesai sudah dua sesi perbincangan kita pada hari ini. Majlis akan berhenti rehat untuk jamuan makan tengah hari. Majlis akan bermula semula tepat jam 2:30 petang untuk sesi yang ketiga. Maka dengan ini, majlis menjemput semua peserta dan hadirin untuk menjamu selera di tempat yang telah disediakan.